if we really believe that evil exists, then how do we account for some sort of a standard of goodness? Why do we believe that goodness exists? After all, if we believe that there is something that is wrong, that something departs from the way things ought to be, then we believe implicitly in some sort of a standard. And so there must be some sort of a deviation from that standard if we're going to talk about evil. So where did that standard come from? And as many people have acknowledged, that the atheist or the naturalist has not only the problem of evil to deal with, but also the problem of goodness. If you really take evil seriously, then where does that standard of goodness come from? So those are a few things that we ought to keep in mind as we look at the context of these two worldviews and try to discern which viewpoint offers the best explanation. In fact, the Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga has correctly observed that God's existence and nature offer suggestions for answers, he says, to a wide range of otherwise intractable questions. In other words, if God does not exist, if we have not been made in the image of God as reasoning beings and so forth, then what we're left with are simply a bunch of conundrums or brute facts. Well, it's just the way that things are. We don't know any more beyond it. As Bertrand Russell said when it came to how the universe got here, this atheist in a debate with Frederick Copleston said, the universe is just there, and that's all. Well, if the universe began to exist, we don't want to say, well, it's just there and that's all. Now, if we don't have an answer for it, that's one thing, but just to say it just came into existence and it's just there and deal with it. Well, if you have an explanation that can actually go beyond that and say, well, maybe there's a being who brought this about, something external to the universe that brought the universe into being. Now, I probably should add this too. I know, as I said before, we're looking at theism and naturalism. But even if we look at Eastern philosophy and Asian religions, it's important to keep in mind that we're still basically dealing with the same kind of territory, the same sorts of phenomena. We're either dealing with theism or a non-theistic context. Most Asian religions are very non-theistic. Maybe pantheistic. They may deny that the physical world even exists. And so that's why the Asian religion scholar Ninian Smart said that the Western or theistic conception of the importance of the historical process is largely foreign to these faiths, and that the notion of a personal God is altogether less prominent. So if these reasons for God's existence hold up, then we are not only dealing with naturalism, but we're also offering an effective response to Buddhism, Jainism, Shintoism, Taoism, and various other religions in Asia. So hopefully that will give us a little bit of perspective on as we look at some of these topics tonight. And so the question, again, it's important to keep in mind, we're looking at a viewpoint that is going to make the best sense out of all these features. Now, some people say, well, I can't believe in God because look at all the evil that exists. Okay, it's a fair question. Again, probably the problem of evil is the single most difficult question that theists have to deal with. But I think even though theists can deal with this question, not in some sort of decisive way in which no residual questions remain, but I think that the Christian faith offers a better context for making sense out of evil. Let's not just remain stuck on one particular aspect or topic of the issues, but just take a look at the broad range of issues. And as we look at this kind of checklist, going back to Phil Connors and me. Well, it seems that God, as we go through this checklist, does a better job of answering these sorts, or being the basis for these sorts of phenomena than naturalism, or as we can go further to say even many Eastern religious viewpoints. Now, I suppose one caveat to note, and I've spoken to people about this, that they seem to want to hang on to no matter how strained or how remote the possibility is, if it's logically possible that a naturalistic scenario could account for the complexity, the irreducible complexity and fine-tuning of the universe. Well, if there's an outside chance, however remote, 1 in billions of billions, then we ought to go with that. But the problem with that, of course, is that we are talking about something that is, we're going to be basing our lives upon. We're going to be thinking about, are we going to live according to that thin? Are we going to live on that thin reed? Are we going to lean on that thin reed of explanation when there's something that, again, if you're a betting man, you're going to go with somebody who planned the universe to be like this, rather than it being simply a chance event. So we need to keep in mind that that we should reject this faulty assumption that if an explanation is remotely logically possible, then it's just as reasonable as any other. No, in everyday life, what we do is we typically prefer explanations that are more likely or probable, not merely what is logically possible, that very remote chance out of perhaps billions and billions and billions. Now what I'd like to do, we've looked a little bit at naturalism and compared naturalism and theism and looked at for why God makes the best sense out of these things. And so what I'd like to do at this juncture is to address the topic of how naturalists actually help to confirm the better explanation of theism as opposed to naturalism. And so, again, some people say, well, are you saying that Christianity or the existence of God answers all the questions, that there's no mystery left, that there are no problem areas? I'm certainly not asserting that. And we certainly read in Scripture that there is mystery, that there are things that are going to leave questions in our minds, that there are secret things that belong to the Lord. So those are the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind and not become arrogant and high-minded, thinking, hey, I've got all the answers. But rather say, which worldview does a better job? Which offers the greatest plausible explanations for things? Doesn't mean that it answers all the questions. So as we look at these issues, let's keep that in mind. And what I'll do is I'm going to go through some of those phenomena that I mentioned, some of those things on that list, that checklist. And what I'd like to do is actually cite naturalists who actually help to confirm the greater plausibility of a theistic explanation as opposed to a naturalistic one. It's basically the naturalists who have problems with accounting for a number of these things and not the theists. So let's go. Let me I'll rattle off some quotations here, and hopefully it'll be helpful. But what I want to do is, as to borrow from the Beatles, to try to get by with a little help from our naturalistic friends. So one naturalist, when it comes to consciousness, for example, he confesses that we have no idea. This philosopher of mine, Ned Block, says that we have no idea of how consciousness could have emerged from non-conscious matter. And this is what he says. He says, we have nothing, zilch, that's in the original quotation, zilch, worthy of being called a research program to figure out how consciousness could have emerged. He says, researchers are stumped. Berkeley's John Searle, an atheist, says that this issue of consciousness is the leading problem in the biological sciences. People just do not know how to account for it. Jaegwon Kim of Brown University, a philosopher there, again, I'm quoting all naturalists here. He talks about our inability to understand consciousness in an essentially physical world. So, again, back to that question, which makes better sense out of consciousness? That nature explains it, that it came out of non-conscious matter, or that a supremely aware or self-aware being brought consciousness into being in this universe? Another naturalist, Colin McGinn, says that consciousness seems like a radical novelty in the universe. In fact, he wonders how our technicolor awareness can arise from soggy gray matter. Very good question. How do we move from that gray matter to technicolor awareness? just when you think about it, when you look at a TV monitor, I used to work as a security guard.